Good morning and welcome back to Bank of Baroda Baitak. We've got an exciting next program. A jury is going to be out on the judgment of books. And while I'm discussing that, I'd also like to tell you that all festival information can be, the flyers, can be bought at the information desk. And the books, most importantly, are available at the JCB Prize for Literature Festival Bookstore, and that's managed by Full Circle. And now I'd like to introduce this program, which is being presented by JCB Prize for Literature. It's titled How to Judge a Book. We have Meera, writer and journalist, along with Pradip Krishen, naturalist and environmentalist, and also two of the members of last year's panelists for the JCB Prize for Literature. And we also have Parvati Sharma, editor and writer. May I welcome all of these guests to the stage? A big round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen. And also this program is being also filmed by the JCB team. It's exclusively for them.
Thank you. And welcome to this session where we're going to tell you exactly how to judge a book. We're going to give you a formula. We're going to give you some algorithms that you can feed into a computer that will tell you exactly how to judge any book that you come across. Look, I hope you don't believe me because this is nonsense. I apologize for the title. There isn't any one way to judge a book. But with my colleagues and my fellow jury members, what we want to try and do is cycle you through some of the things we negotiated when we were on the jury for the JCB Prize, just to give you a sense of what it's like to be on a jury and to look at books and to think about some of the things that need to be thought about. I'm not going to talk about the big things. I'm not going to talk about the ambition of a novel and things like that. But I'm going to start, just as an example, by talking about things like the kind of biases that we as judges bring to the whole process of being on a jury. For example, I just happen to not particularly like to read sci-fi. Science fiction is not something I normally opt for. But when you're on a jury, you have to sort of somehow, try and disable your biases and say, well, if I do come across a science fiction book, surely I don't want to bring that bias to bear on the business of trying to evaluate that book for the prize. So I'm going to throw this open to Meera and to Parvati. Were there biases that you were conscious of, Parvati, to start with you, when you were reading for the prize? What did you have to do? How did you deal with biases that you perhaps had?
So just to answer via a little digression, I think I was thinking about this through the course of reading the books for the prize and then before this talk. And I think the way that I learned to read was one, through my parents sort of had an extensive library that I had full access to. And my father had a love for the second-hand book market on the pavement of Daryaganj. And every Sunday after Sunday, we would be there. I was there almost from the age that I could walk. I think since I was maybe 4 or 5, I remember going there. And the protocol was that if I liked a book, I would pick it up and I would show it to him and he would buy it. There was never any, never anything that he disapproved of, except perhaps once when I think I was, 10 or 11 and I found this it was a romance novel. In hindsight, it was a Mills and Boons. And at that, my father sort of made a face and he said, I don't think you'll like this. And so there was this inbuilt bias perhaps against overwrought teenage romance that was instilled in me at that age. But other than that, in terms of genre, I just learned to read books as they came, just picking them off either bookshelves or the pavement, and just opening the cover and then waiting to see what it did to me. And in a sense, just before we came up, Meera said that, it was such a nice thing to receive these books. Every few weeks, we'd get a package of 10, 12 books. It was a bit like going back to Daryaganj, having this, little package that you could open and you don't know what it contained. But I think the biases then that I became conscious of in the course of reading is that not of genre, but of style. I think, I certainly have a bias for a certain kind of, or against, let's say, certainly overwriting or too much richness in prose. But having said that, I enjoy playfulness with language and something like Anthony Burgess in A Clockwork Orange is fantastic. I have a bias for a sort of sense of humor in a book. But, having said that, I also enjoy, deep tragedy, like one of the books on our long list, The City and the Sea, Rajkamal Jha's, was just unrelentingly tragic, and it was fantastic. So, and through the course of reading, I was conscious of this, and I think, and I was conscious that certainly these are subjective biases, and what was great was that, I was not reading in isolation. I was reading with all of you and Anjum and Arvind, and we were having these discussions. And so, often if there was something that I had bias against, but there were strong arguments for it from anyone else, then it was easy and possible to overcome. And I think we all did it. I think all of us at some point changed our minds about, some books.
I just perhaps like to explain that the procedures we used for the JCB Prize was that there were 5 of us on the jury. Two members are missing, Arvind Subramaniam and Anjum Hassan. And we tended to meet virtually on Skype roughly every 10 days, 12 days at a time, where we would discuss 12 books. So, yeah, I think it's very obvious that, as judges, as people who are evaluating these books, we're wading in with our own biases. Our biases are actually what are determining what we like and what we don't like. But then the Skype sessions become opportunities for us to actually thrash out these ideas, and sometimes to even be open to be influenced by what other people are saying. Meera, do you want to talk about what Parvati was talking about?
Biases? Yeah. Of course, I am also a biased reader, and my bias is determined by how well the book reads. So I'll open a book, and sometimes I find it very difficult to read. It is the readability quotient, if you explain that. But as serving on this jury, I made it a point that bias does not affect me. I made it a point to read all the books with an open mind, even if some of them were not that interesting, but I'll keep telling myself that something is waiting for me in the last page. So I'll keep on reading, I'll look for that surprise, and it was such an interesting journey. And this experience, as Parvati said, I was telling her the other day that the most interesting part of that reading experience, when you look back, was waiting for the magic box of books, and waiting for that particular surprising, that the most interesting, wonderful book hidden in some of them. And as a writer, it was not it was not easy for me to read a book once I'm writing. So what I did was I stopped all my creative writing for a while and I became just a reader. I ripped my writer status because once you write and read, then you have this subconscious way of rewriting a sentence. So you will read the book as if, okay, if this book, if I had written this book, how would I write this? Question will be there. So I had ripped myself of my writer instincts and became a reader, and it was such a pleasant experience. It was like going back into my childhood where I used to read while eating, sleeping every time. So that's why I think this judging books was a wonderful journey. Earlier, it was a question when, as a writer, my books will also be entered for some prize. And when someone else or myself gets that prize, I always used to wonder how the judges selected this particular book for the prize from so many of prize. Luckily, and even in our case, what would have we done if there was Anna Karenina, War and Peace, the kind of classics, all for a prize. So whenever I opened that magic box of books, this question was always says, oh my God, what am I going to do if there was, you have to select one classic from another kind of books. And luckily, it's a very interesting experience, and I found out that it is very easy to judge a book when you are a reader, when you have no other bias.
I want to admit one of the biases that I brought into the business of being a member of the jury, and that is, and I think this probably has something to do with the fact that I used to be a filmmaker. And this has to do with dialogue, with the spoken word as rendered in a novel. And I tend to find that a lot of novels, a lot of Indian novels, don't actually handle dialogue particularly well. There's something too formulated about the words that are put into people's mouths. People speak in ways that they wouldn't naturally speak in. And it mattered to me. When I'm reading a novel, if people don't speak like you imagine that people actually speak, it would bother me. And therefore, when I did come across a novel such as Madhuri Vijay's wonderful The Far Field, which is the book that unanimously finally won the prize, it was a huge, I'm tempted to say relief, but a huge sense of, wow, this is really there. But I want to ask Parvati, because Parvati writes historical nonfiction. And Parvati, I'm just wondering whether when you read a book that was set in the past and historical characters are given direct speech when the author could have had no access to what they really spoke like, how did you deal with that, or how did you feel about it? Talk us through the historical novels and direct speech then.
So I felt that, direct speech in a historical novel does not intrinsically diminish it. And one of my favorite historical novels of all time is I, Claudius by Robert Graves, and which is set in the sort of Roman Empire. And it's a fantastic book, and a lot of the dialogue has a distinctly English British inflection, like old fellow and stuff like that. But it didn't detract from the book at all, because one, he does it with a great deal of flair, and he just you just read through without with sheer enjoyment. And secondly, because I think that the more important thing in the historical novel is to inhabit that time. So you have, so for example, again in I, Claudius, you have, it's narrated by Claudius, who's the most timid of the family of Augustus, the most literary, the most sensitive, in an otherwise very bloodthirsty family. And yet, he describes gladiatorial combat with great relish. I mean, the men disemboweling each other or being eaten up by lions or whatever is just a great thrill to him. And as a reader, you realize then, because he's the narrator, he's taking you through this, and you think you're on the same page, but you realize, no, you're not, because this man is living in ancient Rome, and this is a different world that you have gone into. And so that kind of detailing and inhabiting of a historical era or historical epoch is what gives a historical novel its whole heart and its thrust. And so sometimes there can be a tendency to use history as just a prop, as just a sort of a good location or good scene, without necessarily any reason for it to have been located in that period. I mean, if you're writing a love story in the 16th century, why is it that you're writing a love story in the 16th century? And amongst our books in the shortlist, the two Perumal Murugans, I mean, our love stories in essence, but also in a sense historical, because they're set, in a sort of pre-independence past, early 20th century, and you realize in the course of reading it that there is a reason, because it's also in that time that this idea of romantic coupledom as an isolated phenomenon is also, emerging, which powers some of the tensions in that in the books. So I think that really for me is the key to historical fiction, is to transport your reader to that place through detail and through knowledge and through a reason for doing what you're doing. That would be my understanding.
I think the fact is that as Indian people who speak English, part of our everyday discourse, the way we talk to each other, is not, in fact, in pure English. We dip easily into other languages, in and out of other languages, with great facility, so much so that it is almost another language or another meta-language. Many years ago, I made a film called In Which Annie Gives It Those Ones, which tried very hard to capture that subcultural sense of being at Delhi University in the 1980s and to render language as she was spoken, in Delhi University at that time. But very few books in English actually do this, perhaps because they worry about whether the use of Indian words, either in Hindi or in Punjabi or whatever, whether they will actually carry to an intended audience that is not familiar with those words. So there is a kind of conscious filtering that happens, I think, when people write in English. And yet, when you look at somebody like Salman Rushdie or Arundhati Roy and the way they've rendered it, I mean, they feel very free to dip in and out of. How does it work for you, Meera? And especially in Malayalam, I'm just wondering whether is there a true rendering of direct speech in a very realistic way, or not?
In Malayalam?
In Malayalam.
Yeah, of course, there is. And I think, as I write, I find it very important to use the exact words in dialogue so that it gives, it either adds to the scene which I am describing or to highlight the character. So there's a purpose in whatever we say. Every spoken word should have a purpose in a fiction, is what I understand or I believe. In that way, how did you find the dialogue part in our books?
I think there were very few books, actually, that handled direct speech really well in a way that I would say, wow, this is fantastic. Very few.
See, when the characters speak, it is problematic in certain ways. That is the author trying to tell something which he or she wants, or is the character saying something to add color to the particular situation, or the color to the character, the strength of the character. No, so that purpose, when it is not taken into consideration, some of the dialogues become quite meaningless communication, which I think I have seen in some of the books. But of course, in many books, the writers, I was so surprised that especially the debut writers, they have understood the purpose of dialogues in fiction, and using that economic use of words and even phrases. It was quite amazing. I'm so happy with the debut novels particularly.
So, in both in writing fiction, but also in cinema, one of the things that I think writers and filmmakers have to negotiate is this business of providing exposition, providing information to the reader or to the watcher of a film that is necessary for them to understand the context, right? So if it's a historical film, but all films, all films will have a context that they want to convey. Now, you can do this well, and you can do it badly. We're not allowed to talk about books that didn't make at least our long list, right? So I'm not going to give you examples from books that we particularly didn't like, but there was one book, for example, in the books we read, that provided 3 pages of actual journalistic articles from the past to provide information about the background for something that was happening in the book. So exposition is something that can be done well, and exposition is something that can be...
Come on, Pradip, you have to be kind to the authors, no? When we write something, we want to tell the audience that you have to think in this way. This is kind of our this instinct is always there. We want to get all the love from the readers, and we want to make sure that they are with us.
No, absolutely. I think exposition it's important to do it, but you have to do it well, as opposed to badly. I remember watching a television serial about India made several years ago, where you have 2 Englishmen walking down a street and they're discussing riots in India and providing all this exposition in a terribly bald way. And they turn around the corner and there comes a riot, barreling down the street. It was just one of those terrible examples of how exposition can be done badly. But Parvati, especially with historical novels, where exposition, again, needs to be provided, do you find that it's intrinsically very hard to do this well?
No, as you're saying, I don't know if it's not really. Certainly there was a lot of exposition in many of the books that we read, and I'm not sure if it was limited only to the historical novels. But there was one thing that I found interesting, that at about, say, 25 years ago, this idea of exposition also used to be linked to the idea of authenticity, especially, I think, particularly in Indian writers writing in English, was that if you were explaining, then you were explaining for a foreign audience, and you were writing for a foreign audience. And whereas I think, and I felt, I don't know how whether both of you will agree, but it felt to me that almost all the books that were written, that we read, were written for an Indian audience. Didn't have, and I think perhaps only one of them, I think our winner, the Far Field, is published abroad, but even that presumes some understanding of Kashmir, of India, of the politics and the history and all of that. So in that sense, that's an interesting shift that seems to have happened over the last quarter century. But that said, I think then the exposition that happens just it boils down to perhaps, bad writing, what else to say, and a certain lack of faith. I think a lot of these things, bad dialogue, over-exposition, it boils down to some sort of inexperience and a lack of faith in the reader, because you feel that the reader will not understand until I detail it down to the last T. Whereas, in fact, as readers, we know, and as writers, we should not forget that half the work of the book happens in the reader's imagination. They do a lot of the work for you. So trusting the reader takes, you have to take that leap of faith. And I think that's why exposition can get so annoying, because it becomes immediately apparent when somebody is over-explaining, not just in terms of over-explaining, but also sometimes there's exposition in terms of symbolic exposition, like if someone is going off on a solitary adventure or leaving everything behind, and then suddenly there's a bird that's flying alone in the air into the horizon, and then a whole series of symbols sort of add up, and you as a reader feel, okay, I'm being hammered on the head with this, and I would have figured it out, 2 pages ago. So
I think there is a confusion between detailing and exposition in many of the novels, at least some of the authors. This is a very interesting part of judging a book, because when the author deliberately guides us to think in a certain way, sometimes it is kind of insulting our intelligence as a reader. Don't you think so?
I want to briefly touch upon humor and the virtual absence of humor in all the books we read. Was that something that struck you as well, both of you? I mean, yes, it's true that humor is fraught with risk, because if it doesn't work, then it flops rather badly. So there's much more risk involved in attempting to be humorous.
But is it, Pradip, is it because in the times we live, it is very difficult to laugh at ourselves?
Oh, I don't think so. I think that humor blossoms even in the darkest times. No, I don't think that that's the reason. There was Paul's book, which was humorous, but very few, very, very few books, right?
Even that was not humorous. You can't say it was dealing with humor, but it was mostly a satire on.
It was satirical. It was zany. I think it was. Yeah, it attempted to, fit into that niche. I also want to talk. Sorry, do you want to say something about that?
Only that I think again, maybe humor also has, so I think in our short list and even in our long list, we have many different kinds of, humor. Often it's very black or satirical or sardonic or, angry humor, but that humor runs through many of the books. But I agree that in the wider range of the books that we read, they were often fairly humorous, and that again to me is perhaps a product of lack of confidence or insecurity, because I remember for myself when I started writing, everything had to be very serious, because I was sort of writing and I was going to write very serious work, and it took a long time to realize that that's not how. I mean, for the most part, I think like there's a homeostatic balance in the body, there's a homeostatic balance in literature and in cinema and in art. You have elements of different emotions combining in a book. I mean, you can have these sort of books that are, like say P.G. Wodehouse is just all-out humor, or again, The City and the Sea, Rajkamal Jha's is just deeply tragic. But for the most part, there's a sort of mixture of things, and that to allow that mixture to happen and not feel that somehow if you throw in the joke, the sort of the seriousness of your point will be diluted takes, I think, some experience. I don't know. I mean, and you're both of you have wonderful humor in your work, so you could.
But our discussions were filled with kind of humorous observations and all, no?
So, in a sense, we're talking about things we look for when you're reading a book, right? I think that one of the, at least speaking personally, I have a sense that if I was reading a book that was completely devoid of a social consciousness, if I was reading a book about India that didn't show any awareness of the huge inequalities of our country, I would be very disappointed in it. I would wonder what kind of a person this is. And can we just talk about social consciousness in novels? Because there are books like The Far Field, which I think exemplify, just the most wonderful sense in which it can work itself into a novel without being something that people are trumpeting or, saying in terribly obvious ways. But speaking personally, it was really important for me that a book set in India has this kind of, has the antennae waving in this particular way. What do you say, Meera?
Yeah, this is one thing which we were unbiased, all the members in the jury. All the books we have selected for the long list as well as short list have something to tell the society, tell something about our society, and a desire to transform our society. It's in all these books. So, as a writer, when I write a story, I always try to find about 3 levels. So I always ask myself, what am I trying to communicate? There'll be a story on the plain level or the surface level. Then there'll be a political or social story in the second level, and there'll be something beyond that, a universal level in the third level. So, as a reader, also, I am looking for all these 3 levels to be satisfied in a story. And I'm so happy that some of the books we have selected for our short list. When one book talks about the Naxal violence in Bengal, or when one book talks about the caste system and patriarchy in Tamil Nadu, you find that first in the reader and in ourselves to see what our society is and how that is documented for future generation. This is kind of a very political activism, and this is the way a writer becomes a political activist, that is by documenting our society for the future generation in all its truth, as well as our vision for the truth or our desires for the truth. So in that way, I'm so happy about this. But again, it all depends on how you want to document your lives and your times. About our shortlist and about our judging experience, I'm so happy that the authors have realized that unless you talk about your society, unless you dream about transforming your society, your writing is futile. Maybe that is why there is not much humor in the novels which came in front of us.
Yeah, but I also want to make the distinction, I think, between a novel that starts out as an out-and-out, has a political ambition and is very political in the way it writes, but a book like Madhuri Vijay's Far Field, I think is remarkable for not being overtly political, not seeming to be political, and yet is deeply political and deeply disturbing for the kinds of values that she holds and the kind of situations that the protagonist finds itself in. And I think that, for those of you who haven't read Madhuri Vijay, I just want to say, what a remarkable book it was, and how, for us on the jury, it was a unanimous decision that this here was a real gem of a book that was also the discovery of a great new writer on the Indian firmament, writing in English. Do you want to, Parvati, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree, Meera, and Pradip, what you said is true. The sort of a conscience is integral to fiction, and so I just before this I was attending this 2-week theater workshop for various reasons, and the person who was conducting it began the workshop by asking everybody 4 questions about their work. And I think these are questions that all of us ask ourselves as writers, filmmakers, and people who sort of create art. But it was nice to have them articulated. And the question was basically, what is the material that you have? What do you want to do with the material? And the third question particularly was, what is the urgency for telling the story that you're telling? Except, the person who's conducting the workshop was French with rather broken English, so it got translated as, what is the emergency for doing what you're doing? And I think all our books, both in the long list and in the short list, reflect a certain emergency that is being felt both at a political and at a social level. Each one of them is written with an urgent need to say something, to intervene, to highlight, to expose, and that was for me one of the best parts of being on this jury, to get to read these books that embrace such a wide range of concerns with so much heart.
Actually, after rereading all the books selected for the shortlist, I felt kind of a sense of satisfaction, because here are some books which will collectively give a complete sense of the society, the country, the so-called nationhood, everything we experience in our present-day life. That was remarkable about this, being a part of this jury.
Okay, now just to shift focus slightly, I want to talk about something that I noticed missing from a lot of the books. And this may have to do with my present concerns as somebody who works in landscapes. But I actually found that very few books that were submitted to us that we read for this prize actually are sensitive to landscape. And by landscape, I don't necessarily mean pretty pictures, beautiful rivers or sparkling seas or nice hills, but even the degraded landscape of a city, for example. But it's almost as if it's a blind spot with a lot of Indian writers in English. And I'm going to ask you, Meera, to talk about whether this is true of, say, writing in Malayalam, because I can't believe it can be, but give me a minute. I'm going to illustrate this point with something that happens in my work with me today. I've been traveling in the desert for the last many years because I look for seeds in the desert. And we found a particular landscape that was very distinctive looking in the desert. And we would often go to a local herdsman or a farmer and we'd say, what do you call these particular parts of the desert that seem to be scattered and isolated, but they look different? And they wouldn't understand my question, and they would often give me a geographic label, and they'd say, this is so-and-so. And I'd say, look, I'm not looking for the name of the place, but I'm just wondering whether you have a term that describes a particular kind of landscape. And finally, somebody said to us, yeah, we call it Roi. And we said, say it again, say it slowly. He said Roi. And we realized that there was a name that is used locally by people to describe a particular kind of natural jungle of shrubland in the desert. And I immediately connected it to the fact that in other parts of the world, other dry, arid parts of the world, in, say, Western Australia, you have the Mulga region, and you have the Fynbosch in South Africa, and you have the Garrigue in dry parts of southern France and Spain, and you have the chaparral in California, and all these shrublands are celebrated and conserved and visited and photographed and loved. And we have the Roi in Rajasthan, and nobody knows what it's called. And nobody celebrates it, and nobody conserves it, and nobody loves it, and the forest department treats it as a wasteland. And I'm just wondering whether India as a civilization is kind of blind to landscape. I discovered that the Geological Survey of India has 57 national geological monuments. Nobody has heard of them. 17 of them are in Rajasthan. Nobody visits them. They're not even announced. They're not even boards present where they are. The forest department doesn't know where they are, you know. Whereas if you go to a place like Namibia or South Africa, these places are loved, you know, and they take great care to let people and tourists and visitors know that these places exist. But here in our novels too, I found, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that landscape doesn't really figure. So we have at least 3 or 4 novels set in the Himalaya, and the Himalaya are sort of there as a passing background, but they're not evoked. We had at least 3 or 4 books set in the Northeast, but the Northeast for me was not evoked. I wonder why that is so. Do either of you want to comment about that?
I don't know why it happens so. Maybe I would say that unless the story is so original, you cannot connect the characters and the story to the landscape and the nature. If you shape or form a story disconnected from the land it evolves, it always happens. As a writer, I don't think it is possible for me because all my characters are deep-rooted in the place they are living. And I have to talk about, I use the metaphors I use the metaphors of landscape or nature or the flora and fauna to express the characters and the situations. I don't see why. Is it because the children of today are disconnected from nature? I don't know. But I don't see much of description, even in the historic novels. There were 2-3 novels where the nature in which the characters and the author were living was so convincing. They were so realistic. It convinced the reader that the story actually took place. Some of the readers, many of the authors, don't believe in that, and they think that a story can stay in the atmosphere just disconnected from the land. As you said, it's glaring. But I think it reduces fiction. Otherwise, had there been that landscape, it would have been many of the books would have been better books. But unfortunately, the authors didn't think so as we did.
I guess, and even urban landscape actually.
You asked about Malayalam books. Normally, most of the Malayalam authors are so, they describe a lot about the landscape, I think. That's why what I feel.
I remember going to Wales once and seeing a small area of maybe 20 or 30 square kilometers. And they said that, this landscape was written about by a particular author who's died now, but all his books were set in this landscape. And we commemorate his memory by having, lots of memorials to him within this landscape. But I can't think of a single writer in English in India who is, in the same sense, is connected with a particular landscape.
Yeah, here's one.
There is one?
Because I wrote about Calcutta. My book was, actually Calcutta is a character in that book. And in Poison of Love, Vrindavan is a character. Is kind of a perfect setting as well as a character. I think it was quite useful.
Yeah, no, I suspect that this is probably not true of Indian writing in Indian languages. This may be, something that is more true of English writing in India. Look, we're running out of time. We wanted to leave 15 minutes for questions and for the audience. Can we pass the mic around? And yeah. The gentleman here on the... Oh, okay.
Good morning, ma'am. My question is, if a child or an adult or an adolescent has to choose a book to read on the first bird's eye view, or at a glance you can say, in a shop or in a book fair, what are the things the child needs to keep in her mind to choose a book? Whether the book is appropriate for her or for him or not.
For you or you, right? No. That's a difficult question. That's why I was trying to pass it to Parvati. But I don't know how to advise a child to choose a book which she or he which is appropriate. Appropriate is another word. It's a problematic word. But as a child, I used to select a.
Should I put the question in a little different way, which is according to the topic which has been displayed here? I just mean to say, how does a child choose how to judge a book, whether to read, whether the book is suitable for her or not?
As a child, I can give only one advice, or I can share my experience as a child, how I selected my books. So I used to open the book and read the first page, which comes to mind. And if it touches me, I would read the rest of the book. I think there is no difference between a child or adult or an academic person while reading fiction or a story. How do you read a fable by Aesop? How do you read it? Or how do you read a story, a folk story, like Beauty and Beast, or Cinderella? As a child, you get a different perspective, and as an adult, as you grow with the story grows with you too, and it will be different. The only way to judge a book, even if you are not in the jury, even if you are judging it just like a reader, there's only one touchstone for that, whether it touches you or not.
She's talking about judging a book by looking at it, just the cover.
Looking
perhaps.
at,
Just the cover.
yeah, it is very difficult. I don't have an advice. But
Never judge a book by its cover. Old saying.
True. That's true.
Thank you. So I had a question, and I'll give a brief context before that. So given the current socio-political milieu that we are in, a lot of the ideologies and beliefs that people have are very prevalent vis-a-vis feminism or many different ideologies that people generally have. So as a member of the jury, or even if you are independently reviewing a book or evaluating a book, do you try to consciously suspend yourself from these beliefs and ideologies, because it is often the situation or case that people often take a very populist stance when they choose a book for a prize, or they decide that this book is worthy of people reading it or not. So do you often try to suspend yourself from the prevalent ideologies and beliefs to not take a populist stance, because there are so many books that have beautiful prose, that have a really captivating storyline, for example, but they may not be politically or socially correct. So do you actively try to disassociate yourself from the political or social climate that we are in currently? Yeah.
So I guess I would answer that maybe in one or two ways. One is, I think the process of writing is not just the process of writing, it is also a process of thinking. So any book cannot be divided between its prose and its story and its argument and its ideas. All of them combine together to make the book what it is, right? So it would not be that if a book was fantastically written and it was arguing something that I absolutely disagreed with, then it would be so well written that I would take its argument seriously. So in that sense, I would engage with that book on its terms. So I think that would be usually the way that as a reader I would read, and that is the way that I read on the jury, without any sort of conscious attempt to sort of position myself in any way as neutral, but as a reader waiting to see what the book had to say to me and how I reacted to what it was saying. But I don't know how the two of you thought.
We've been talking about biases, right? We've been talking about the biases that you bring to reading, but we are not, we're not blank people. We're people with our own ideas and our own values, and those values are carried into the process of reading, right? So if you were to read a book that actually trod ground that you felt very opposed to, that bias would inform the way you read that book. Next question, please. This gentleman in the fifth row, in the green sweater.
Hi, my name is Mandar. Sir, you made some very interesting observations about implanting landscapes and direct speech into the story. And one can't help but recall Raja Rao's work, where he managed to do that, convey a spirit that is his own in a language that is not his own, as R. Parthasarathy described it, his work. He managed to do that in the English language very well. But yes, in general, among Indian English writers, that's probably a deficiency. But regional writers do tend to do that rather well. I agree with Meera there. So I can say that certainly about Kannada. So my question is, when you pick up a book that has been translated, right, and you had 2 such writers in your shortlist, do you think that so the spirit that they have conveyed in a language that is their own kind of gets lost because no translation is lossless? How do you kind of take that into account?
Let me just start off by saying that I think that as a jury, all of us were quite disappointed by the quality of translations that we came across. I mean, there were 2 translations in the shortlist, but many more that we actually read. And in many cases, we thought that, a rather good novel had probably been spoiled by a really third-rate translation. And when you think about it, I think the JCB Prize has gone out of its way to try and encourage translations and to reward translators for the work they do. But the fact of the matter is that it is such a poorly rewarded profession. What is it, 2 rupees per word or something like that? It's ridiculous. So you're not getting the best people. It's very hard to do that. And it's something that has to be addressed quite urgently, I'm sure that there are lots and lots of novels in lots of Indian languages that have just not made it in the best possible way into the consciousness of people who read English just for this reason. So translation is a major problem. Yeah, I agree. Do you want to add to that?
Maybe there are certain things which cannot be translated as such because there won't be a cultural equivalence of that in the language into which you translate. But even then, if the translator believes in the story and actually can experience the spirit of the book, it will be a fairly good translation. Otherwise, it will diminish into just summarizing the book in English, which is happening in many of the books which came to us. But I think that only good writers can be good translators. And in a way, even writers are translating our thoughts into the language into a language which we are thinking. No? So I think all books are translated books. But then translating into other languages have this problem, but still, I think that's a great art.
It's one of the problems, I think, is that a translator needs to be truly bicultural or bilingual, truly in every possible, deeply. So it's not enough for a person who understands Kannada well to do a good English translation. They also have to be really good writers in English. And that seldom happens. That is very seldom the case. Next question. The lady with the tallest hand there. Can you pass the mic there? Yeah.
Hello. So you talked a lot about social consciousness, right? About how the novel should reflect concerns of society.
But not should reflects how it reflects.
Yeah, but why should all novels be about how society is?
Why can't a novel be about how society can be? You know, that's the question.
Oh, that's perfectly all right. I mean, all I'm saying, I think, is that if one read a novel that was completely oblivious to social reality and political reality, one would be very suspicious, I think, of that kind of a novel. But sure, it can be about how society can be, should be, will be. That's fine. There's no problem there at all.
And sorry, if I may
Yeah,
add,
sure.
but I think is and can be often go together also, because when you're describing what is, if you are critiquing it, then implicit in your description is what it could be, or what you think it should be, or you know how things might be better. The two are rarely separate, I would say.
The lady there next to you.
Hi. You talked about exposition, and my question is, do you think it's the reader's prerogative to do some background reading and have their own research in place when they pick up a book? And as a writer, especially with historical writing, how much detail is enough detail? How do you draw that line?
How much what, sorry?
How much detailing is enough detailing? How much background is enough background? How do you draw that sort of a line?
So I think in terms of I think it's not a question of amount of detail, specifically in the context of history, but I think also in fiction and everything else, it's choosing the right detail, you know. So it's for example, I've recently written a biography of Jahangir, and Jahangir was a Mughal emperor, and he's, of course, everyone knows the Mughals were very rich, very powerful, all of that. And there's this one little story about him. He goes fishing, and he catches. He's using a special kind of net, and he manages to catch a dozen fish, and he's very pleased with having how his expertise, or how he's learned to use this net. So as a result, because he's so pleased, he lets the fish go, but in each fish gets a little pearl stuck to its nose. You know, so I would say like that one detail shows you more about, you know, just the sheer power and wealth of this man, that he can even put pearls on fishes, than if I was to list out, you know, exactly how much money he had in his mint, or how many rubies he owned, all of that. So it's the choice of the detail that matters. And I think to your other question in terms of should a reader do some background reading, as a reader I would say no, but I do like books that once I've read them make me want to go and read more, you know, about whatever it is that they're about. So they rouse a curiosity and make me want to go ahead and explore further.
Can I share with you a story that Arundhati Roy told me about The God of Small Things when she first wrote it? And she had found a publisher in England, and she went to America, and she met an American publisher who said, you know, I really love your book, but I want you to change the first chapter. And she said, why? And he said, because you introduce a reader to an unfamiliar culture too rapidly. And Arundhati said, no, I don't want to do that. When we read, you know, a black writer from America writing about a very particular subculture, we don't expect them to, you know, spell out everything to us. We accept it and we learn about it. And much later, the same publisher wrote to Arundhati and said, you know, I was completely wrong and you were completely right. I'm sorry for having made that suggestion to you. So I think it's important, you know, that we don't play to this imagined ignorance of an audience, and that we just tell it like it is. Are we out of time, or do we have a few minutes? One last question? Okay, one last question. Who wants to ask the lady with the stripes, the tigress lady?
I hope so. All right, my question is about biases. When you are judging a book, how important, like, do you believe that the known publishers compared to a self-published book have done more of a due diligence and made it easier, and there's a bare minimum of the book that you'll find in judging? As an author, I would like to know whether self-publishing or...
I don't think that, I mean, I'm not even aware of the publisher when I'm reading a book, quite frankly. I think an interesting question might be, is the reading of a book influenced at all by the cover of a book? And it probably is to some extent, but to a very small extent. But maybe you guys have something to want to say about that question? Are you influenced at all by the kind of publisher it is?
No, I wouldn't say that. But if the question is about publishing versus, or publishing with a publisher versus publishing yourself, if I've understood the correct question correctly, then I think the great advantage of a publishing house is that many people read it. I mean, including your editor. And I think the value of that feedback from editors and from people that read the book before it's published is invaluable. I mean, because it's difficult to judge your own writing with that kind of distance that an editor can afford.
We possibly have one last question. The guy who's waving his hand there on the...
Thank you, sir. Do you see any chances for graphic novels to be shortlisted in this award? Graphic novels.
Somehow I don't think so, because I think it wouldn't be in the rules. But I don't know, why not? Why not?
Why not? I think it is possible. Any kind of fiction which will stay with you, which strikes a chord in your heart, can be shortlisted, of course.
We'll suggest it to JCB. All right, well, thank you very much.
Once again, how about a big hand for our panelists? The books, including the winner of last year's JCB Prize for Literature, as discussed here, Farfield, is available at our festival bookstore. Our authors have kindly agreed for the book signees. You can exit this venue, and that's right to the left of you, the author signing tents. And also, we'd like to honor our participants, our panelists, with festival garbs. Once again, how about a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?